serve you.
I will serve
Give you
you.
everything.
I'll give you everything.
I will lift up
I will lift
my
up
eyes to your throne.
my eyes to your throne.
I will trust you.
I will trust you.
Trust you alone.
I'll trust in you alone.
I will give you all my worship. I will give you all my praise. You alone I long to worship. You alone are worthy of my praise. I will give you all my worship. I will give you all my praise. You alone I long to worship. You alone are worthy of my praise. I will give you all my worship. I will give you all my praise. You alone I long to worship. You alone are worthy of my praise. I will give you all my worship. I will give you all my praise. You alone I long to worship. You alone are worthy of my praise. I will give you all my worship. I will give you all my praise. You alone I long to worship. You alone are worthy of my praise. You may be seated. All right, once again, welcome to Flack Memorial. We're glad you chose to join us this morning. On to announcements. We have Lifeline screening Thursday, November 21st, 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. If you're interested, there are information sheets out there in the foyer. Also, Sunday, November 24th, a couple weeks, we have Thanksgiving dinner immediately after the service. Bring a side dish and or dessert and enjoy a Christian fellowship with great friends. So that's always a fun meal right after the service before Thanksgiving, before everything really gets busy. Also, this month, fall food drive for the Good Samaritan Center. Donated food will be delivered at the end of November in time for the holidays. And I think there's one more. Also, second Monday every month, 8:30 a.m., IHOP and Liberty, we have our senior breakfast, so don't forget to attend that. And also, another announcement, just thank you for everybody who provided foods this weekend. I know we had a couple services this weekend, so thank you to everybody who graciously donated to the families who were here in time of sorrow. Any other announcements? If not, go ahead, stand and greet one another. highest of heights to the depths of the sea. Creation's revealing your majesty. From the colors of fall to the fragrance of spring. Every creature unique in the song that it sings, all exclaiming, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. Who has told every lightning bolt where it should go? Or see heavenly storehouses laden with snow? Who imagined the sun and give source to its light, yet conceals it to bring us the coolness of night? None can fathom, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable, you place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable, you place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable, you see the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing, God. You may be seated. Draw me close to you. Never let me go. I lay it all down again to hear you say that I'm your friend. You are my desire. No one else will do. 'Cause nothing else could take your place. To feel the warmth of your embrace.
Help me find the way. Bring me back to you. You're all I want. You're all I've ever needed. You're all I want. Help me know you are near. Draw me close to you. Never let me go. I lay it all down again to hear you say that I'm your friend. You are my desire. No one else will do, 'cause nothing else could take your place. To feel the warmth of your embrace. Help me find the way. Bring me back to you. You're all I want. You're all I've ever needed. You're all I want. Help me know you are near. You're all I want. You're all I've ever needed. You're all I want. Help me know you are near. Help me know you are near. Help me know you are near.
Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above. join with all nature in manifold witness
to thy great faithfulness,
mercy and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness.
morning by morning,
New mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thy own dear presence to cheer and to guide. Strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
If you served in the armed forces for our country, or are serving in the armed forces for our country, would you stand up this morning so we can honor you? Ed mentioned a little bit ago those who provided food and helped serve meals the last 2 days, Friday and Saturday. And I want to echo those thanks to everybody of our church family who helped with the arrangements and the families of the Neal family on Friday, and then the Carmichael family on Saturday. We appreciate your service and your hospitality that was demonstrated towards the families. It was greatly appreciated by both families, and we say thank you very much for those who helped serve. We also want to extend again our condolences to the Neal family and to the Carmichael family in the loss of Bob and Bob. This past couple of weeks has been difficult. I'm going to finish up this morning on a message we started last week entitled Making Man. Howard Hendricks said, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. More than once I've heard in the last few years, new parents with new children arriving asking where the instruction book was. I've counseled many couples before they got married, and they wanted to know what the instruction, if there was an instruction manual available for marriage. I gladly told them yes. I pointed them to the book of Genesis and simply said, take some time to read it and get to know what the original designer of man intended for us. And so the title of the message is The Making of Man, and Genesis 1:26-31 is the passage we've been looking at. Last week we talked about two things. Number one was that man, one of the purposes, objectives that God had in creating man was that he would be an image bearer. In Genesis 1:26, God said, let us make man in our image and according to our likeness. And image and likeness, while they are two different words, mean the same thing. They are synonymous terms. The word image actually means to carve. You can go over to Exodus chapter 20 and verse 4, where God says, do not make for yourself any graven image. The word carve is there, the word is graven. What's interesting is that as an image bearer of God, what's it mean? It means we are persons. Amazingly enough, the objective of God in the creative act of making man was to reflect the persons of the Godhead, to reflect their communion, their conversation, their intimacy, their fellowship. Mankind was made, male and female, for the purpose of relationships, not only between the sexes, but between the creature and the Creator. In fact, if you don't have that one right, the creature and the Creator relationship, then no human relationship can ever rise to the level that God intended it to be. It's absolutely amazing when you start to think about how God interacted, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, how they interacted with one another before there was anything. They established the qualities and the requirements of what it means to have a relationship. And human beings cry out for relationships. Sociologists have identified the two greatest needs of human beings. One is to show love, the other is to receive love. We are designed to be together and relate to one another. Why? Because that's what God does. And He made us to relate to Him and then to relate to each other. My insurance agent contacted me a number of years ago and said, you know, Mr. Hunterdost, in your homeowner's policy, you have a provision for which you are already paying but not using. I said, what would that be? He said, identity theft. Who wants to be me? And of course, he said, there are all kinds of people who would like to be you for fraudulent and illegal purposes. And the problem is, they will destroy your identity and assume it for themselves. I said, well, if I'm already paying for it, sign me up. What do I need to do? And he told me how to go online and sign up for my identity theft coverage in my homeowner's policy. Little did I know that it would just take a few years and identity theft becomes a national problem. But I really want to know who wants to be me. Better question is, who wants to be you? Do you understand? We live in a world now where everybody is in a crisis over their identity. It isn't that somebody's stealing your identity, it's that those of us who are living and breathing sometimes question who and what we are. And immediately, in the making of man, God establishes our identity. He carves into us personhood, and He builds into us that inherent, innate longing to have a relationship. That's the first thing we saw last week. We are image bearers. We are persons. Personhood defines who we really are, independent of our outward appearance. We all are made up of our will and our soul and our mind and our thoughts. Those are the immaterial parts of us that make us who we are, and it makes us relate to one another. We have the fantastic capability of having relationships, to love and to give love. We have the fantastic ability built into us by God as image bearers to want to relate, to want to enjoy, to want to converse, to want to have intimacy. So no matter what we may perceive our identity to be, ultimately, at the very basic level, we all are made for relationships with our Creator and with one another. The second thing we saw, besides image bearer or personhood, was to be and be's, propagation. When God said, let us make man in our image and according to our likeness, He said to them, as He continued the creative act in verse 28, He said, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth. Contrary to our culture's opinion of sex, it is not something to be used, sold, or trifled with. It was intended by the Creator for the purpose of intimacy, enjoyment, pleasure, and propagation. Sex was not the original sin, as some people think. The original sin was pride and rebellion. Sex was corrupted by the fall. God intended for man and woman to have children, family. The first, most basic unit of culture and society in the biblical record is the family. And as the family goes, so goes civilization. That's established in the second purpose. First is personhood, second is propagation. God designed us to have families. I want you to jump down to chapter 2 and verse 24. Chapter 2 is a retelling of day 6 in the creation of Adam and Eve and of mankind. It's an expansion and an explanation of what is stated in verses 26 through 31. But I want you to notice something in verse 24 and 25 of chapter 2. God has already caused Adam to go to sleep. He's opened him up. He's taken bone out of his side, and He's fashioned Eve. Verse 24. I always found this fascinating. He says, "For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother." Do you ever ask yourself, how do Adam and Eve know how to relate to that statement? Who's mom and dad? Let me tell you what God intends in this statement. He intends that the most basic unit of civilization and social structure is the family, and that it will continue into succeeding generations. What's he do in chapter 2, verse 24? He establishes the divine purpose of the creation of mankind to establish a family so that it will keep on moving and establishing what? Individual family units. Adam and Eve never left mom and dad. They didn't have any. Mom and dad was their creator. But in that statement, you know that Adam and Eve understand their second purpose in being and existing and being created, propagation. So who's going to be mom and dad? Adam and Eve are. What's going to happen when they have children? They're going to move out and marry and establish another family unit. And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes, and now we're 7 billion strong on planet Earth. Isn't it amazing when you stop to consider the purposes and the objectives of God in the creation of mankind, and how, in spite of sin and human failure, the objective and the purpose still are in force? The most basic relationship established in the second purpose is the marriage relationship. A couple of weeks ago, we saw that Jesus values children. And we're attacking this backwards. Why? Because Jesus designed the covenant of marriage. We often think of marriage as an institution, and who wants to be committed to an institution? You've heard that joke. In Genesis 1 and 2, marriage is established as a covenant, a commitment and a bond of promise and trust between two creatures made in the image of the Creator. Adam and Eve had clear understanding of God's objectives and purposes up to this point. Third thing in the four purposes in God's making of man, the third thing is that He blessed them. He blessed them. You know, it's easy to read over verse 28 and the first three words of verse 28. It says, God blessed them. You've probably been told by people sometimes, have a blessed day. You may have said, bless, somebody may have said to you sometime, bless you, when you sneezed or coughed. Somebody may have said to you sometime, we're praying God's blessings on you. What in the world are they talking about? You may have read the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 where Jesus says, blessed is, blessed is, blessed is. You may have even read Psalm 1 where it says, blessed is the man. What in the world is he talking about when he talks about the word blessed? You may have heard people say, well, I'm just so blessed. What are they talking about? The word blessed means more than happy, means more than I've been taken care of. At the root of the word blessed there in verse 28, it means God takes care of our well-being. He takes care of our well-being. When Moses writes here in Genesis 1:28, God blessed them, He blessed Adam and Eve. What did he mean? It means that God said to Adam and Eve, everything out here is designed for your well-being, including Adam, Eve, including the promise of children, including everything you see around you. God said in Genesis there, he says, everything I have given you, in verse 29, I've given you every plant yielding seed that's on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which is fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. Why did God make dandelions? I don't know. They served a purpose, not to frustrate you and cause you to spray herbicide on them or put down fertilizer or anything else. I'm sure there was a reason why God made hippopotamuses, which is what you want for Christmas, that and your 2 front teeth. See, the idea behind the fact that one of the objectives of God's creation and making man was that when he'd finished the creative act in all of creation except for man, and when he finished man, Adam and Eve, he blessed them. He said, here it is. It's all here for your well-being, for your good. I made this to make you happy, for you to enjoy. Boy, we've certainly taken a left-hand turn on that one, haven't we? And we'll see down the road why that's so. But boy, it's hard for us to wrap our minds around the fact that here we're looking at purposes and objectives in the making of man, and yet we're sitting here and we're, in the back of our mind, we're asking the same question. It ain't working. And boy, you're preaching to the choir when you tell me that. I know. I live in the same world you do. I live in the same reality you do. Things fall apart, things break, things are used wrong. How in the world do you look at God's creation now and say it's there for our well-being? But in spite of sin and rebellion on man's part, we still have the grace of God providing for us. It still rains, the earth still produces. But boy, the things aren't operating the way they were designed to be operating. That's true. But if you don't know what the objectives are, you'll never know if you hit the target. If you aim at nothing, you're sure to hit. Blessing, well-being. God blessed it. Here's the intent of well-being. It's that God intended for man to prosper. Now you got to define prosper, right? Because we tend to think of prosper as affluence, as of gaining things, of physical well-being. But it says the intent of the phrase God blessed them means that he caused them to prosper. You notice that as you read Genesis 1 and 2, God always ends, whenever he does any work, God always ends by saying, it was good. It was good. It was good. It was good. You can even read Genesis 1 and you get done with it and you know what it says? It was good. Then you read Genesis chapter 2 and you get to verse 18 and it says, the Lord God said, it is not good. What? That man be alone. He says, I will make a corresponding helper or matching kind for him. When he finished making Eve, he said, it was good. It was good. See, the idea of God blessing Adam and Eve was that everything now was as it should be, as he wanted it to be, and everything, he says to Adam and Eve, is there for your good. He blessed them. He caused them to prosper. He made them happy. Can you imagine experiencing genuine happiness all the time? I can't, because I don't. You don't either. But can you imagine an environment in which everything is there and doing what it's designed to do and it's good? Every one of us longs for the day in which the world we live in functions as it should be, as it was designed to be. One of the most distinctive things about the creative purposes here in the making of man is found in Genesis 1:28 in those first three words. God blessed them. Everything God had done was as it was meant to be, and it was working in perfect harmony under his direction. Even human relationships. Well-being. He made them happy, he caused them to prosper, and he gave them the ability to enjoy all of creation. Gail's been working on our backyard for about 15 years. That's how long we've lived at our current residence. And I remembered moving in, and the first thing we did was my mother and father-in-law planted a row of iris at the back of our property line. And over the last 15 years, Gail's been designing her backyard. Flowers and shrubs and this and that and trees, and mowing back there where she designs her and uses her creative juices is a real challenge sometimes. Weed eating is about a 45-minute job back there. And she stands with great joy both down there in her creation and then up on the deck, overlooking it all as if she were God himself, and looking down on her creation and saying, it's coming together. And then she turns and she looks at me, and I just put the pin in the balloon and pop it. She said, what do you think of it? I said, it looks like work to me. She's won me over, folks, because now I take as much joy in her garden as she does. See, God gave us the ability in making us to enjoy what he's made in all of creation. So that when leaves turn from their various shades of green to all the multicolors you see this time of year, it's designed to bring us joy, well-being. You could have made everything brown, like Kansas. That's not derogatory, just true. And then and I'll tell you what, the first time I drove through the Flint Hills of Kansas, I said, my stars. To me, it was fascinating. I loved it. I just wanted to stop and stay there. I was on my way to Oklahoma City for a meeting. Drove through the Flint Hills of Kansas, and I said, wow. You can literally ride for miles out there and never see anybody. Ranchers out there use helicopters to check on their cattle now. Can you imagine getting on a horse and riding all over that just to find the cows? That was my job on the farm in Iowa. I only had to go a mile. They could ride all day. Well-being. God blessed us. He blessed them. One of God's purposes in making man was that he'd done what he did for our well-being. It's there for us to enjoy. I got to see the Grand Canyon 2 years ago. I'd seen all kinds of pictures, but boy, when you're standing there looking over the edge of the rail and you can't see the bottom, you stop and think about just how magnificent this is. You want to quote Psalm 19. The heavens are declaring your glory. Fourth purpose, job description. I'm dating myself, but for those of you who remember the TV show in the early 60s, Dobie Gillis, Dobie had a friend by the name of Maynard G. Krebs. Maynard G. Krebs was a beatnik in character on the show. kind of scruffy hair and a little ratty goatee. Dobie worked in his father's grocery store and delivered groceries and stocked the shelves. Maynard G. Krebs was a beatnik. A beatnik, for those of you who are a little younger, is equivalent to a hippie, okay? And those of you who don't know what a hippie is, I can't describe it in this generation. At any rate, Dobie's dad would try to get Maynard to work in his store. And every time Dobie's father would say, Maynard, why don't you come and work for me? Maynard would go, work? One of the purposes of God in making man was work. How do I know this? Because he says, verse 26, he said, let us make man in our image. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Then in verse 28, after he tells them to propagate, be fruitful and multiply, have children and family, then he says, subdue it, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Then he says in verse 29, I give you every plant yielding seed. Verse 30, to every beast of the earth I give what I have created for their well-being. Verse 31 ends, God saw all that he'd made. At the end of the sixth day, God looks at everything he's made and he says it's good. On the seventh day, he rests. Why? Because he's worn out? No. He rested because there's nothing else to do. Now you get into Genesis chapter 2 and you read in the expanded version of the creation of Adam and Eve, and he says, not only do I want you to rule over it and subdue the earth, but he says, I want you to tend the garden. God created mankind in his image. A, personhood. B, propagation. Third, well-being. 4, work. Work. He gave man 2 R's, rule and responsibility. The word rule, we have a bad connotation every time we hear the word rule. We think of totalitarian absolutism in a fallen world. The word rule simply means to oversee. You're in charge of it. Responsibility. Tend the garden. Adam and Eve didn't sit down after God created them and did nothing. It says they tended the garden. They cultivated the ground. They took the seeds and the plant seeds that God had created and they began to do what? Cultivate the ground and plant them. How do we know that? Because over in Genesis chapter 5 you discover all the things that man made in God's image did in their job description. They fashioned instruments and tools. They made music and musical instruments. They built cities. They did all kinds of things that fulfill those 2 words, rule and tend. Work and responsibility. He gave them a job description. It's in Genesis chapter 2 that you find something interesting. Verse 19 of Genesis chapter 2, after God makes Eve, verse 19, it says, out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and he brought them to man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called a living creature, that was its name. We don't catch it by reading it in the English language. In Near Eastern culture, giving a name, naming something, was a sign of authority. It was a sign of authority. Genesis 1:26, who names man? God does. It says, let us make man in our image. God names his creature man. In Genesis 2:19, when God finishes his creative work on the 6th day and he finishes making Adam and Eve, what does he do? He brings all the creatures before Adam, and Adam does what? He names them. What did God do there? He gave man a responsibility. He defined what man's work would include, taking care of all that God's made for our well-being. And he brings to Adam all the beasts that he's formed of the field and every bird of the sky, and he brought them before man, and Adam named them. What's that tell you about Adam's capacity? He had intellect, didn't he? He had the ability to evaluate what was there. And he understood his responsibility to what God had created, and so he named it. Now, I mentioned hippopotamus earlier. Hippopotamus is a Greek word. You didn't know you knew Greek, but it's a Greek word. Hippopotamus means water horse. Now, I don't know what the name was that Adam gave the hippopotamus, but I know the name we call the water horse today, hippopotamus. Adam had intellect. He had the ability to think. He had the ability to communicate. Amazing. And in this job description, purpose that God has given Adam, he says, you got two things. Number one, you're going to watch over my creation. And it's there for you to use and live off of, because I'm designing this for your well-being. And then he says, I want you to tend the garden. Built into man is the responsibility from the Creator to work at what God has given. They just didn't sit down and watch it all grow and never have to lift a finger to do anything to take care of themselves. What is God's purposes in making man? There are four of them. Very clear. Very clear. Number one, we are an image bearer. All human beings bear that carving of personhood in their being. And it was placed there by God the Creator. Second purpose in God's making of man was propagation. And he establishes two basic things for all of civilization and society from that point forward. Number one, he makes marriage. Number two, he makes family. The third thing he makes in making man is that he blesses them. Everything God did was good. It's as it should be, and it was for Adam and Eve's and our well-being. God blessed us. He gives us the ability to acquire and prosper and to enjoy what he's made. He gives us the ability to enjoy all of creation. The fourth purpose in making man, then, is that he gives Adam and Eve a responsibility. He gives them some authority, and he gives them some work. Rule and responsibility. Subdue, rule over, manage it, and work. Tend. Tend the garden. What have you learned this morning? You've learned one thing, and I've never said it. You've learned one thing: the world you live in isn't like this anymore, right? I don't have to explain that to you. You know that personally by your own experience. What happened? You know, I wish Genesis stopped with chapter 2. Genesis chapter 3. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Pastor. Yeah, I see those four purposes. Yeah, I kind of understand that. But, Pastor, it ain't working that way. I know. That's part of the problem, isn't it? It doesn't work the way God made it. And everybody is looking for answers. Well, we're going to get to that next week. Let's pray. Father, this morning, it's amazing what you did simply by the word of your mouth in your creative acts. Even in a world that isn't functioning like you made it, it's amazing at your design and your love and care for your creatures. You made us for yourself, and we are restless until we find our peace in you. We know that all too well. You have spoken clearly as to why you made us. We bear your likeness. We are persons. We long for relationships. We long to be understood. We long to love. We long to have conversation and communion untainted by the realities of sin in our lives. We love what you've made for us, even if it isn't working right. The beauty of turning leaves, the blueness of the sky, the simplicity of rain on dirt that makes things grow. The ability to go from enjoying under a microscope the smallest parts of life to the expanse of the universe. All done with the simple gaze of an eye that moves faster than we can imagine. The taste of things we enjoy, the taste of things that are dangerous for us, the sensation of feel and touch, the craving of the unseen part of us that desires, the quest for intimacy, all built by you. You blessed us. And you gave us something to do. You establish our identity. You give us meaning and significance. And we thank you for being such a generous creator. It is not without problem. And you had the grace and the wisdom and the foresight to remedy even that. Why are we here? We are here because you made us in your image. We are persons. We desire a relationship of marriage and family. You designed that. You blessed us. You want us to be happy. You want us to prosper. You want us to enjoy everything your hand has made. You want us to be responsible. And we can only achieve these things when we have our first relationship between creature and creator down. You've designed us for you. And we are restless until we come home to you. Thank you for your grace demonstrated at the cross. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'll be here afterwards. If you want to talk, be glad to do that or pray. Thank you for coming this morning.